This is a recording from December 3rd, 2024. In it, the current president of South Korea declares martial law in the country.
세력의 위협으로부터 자유 대한민국을 수호하고 우리 국민의 자유와 행복을 약탈하고 있는 자유 헌정 질서를 지키기 위해.
But just 6 hours after this speech, the president rescinds his decree. He is banned from leaving the country and named a suspect in a treason case.
그러나 조금 전 국회의 계엄 해제 요구가 있어 계엄 사무에 투입된 군을 철수시켰습니다.
Surprised? For some reason, we're used to North Korea being the bastion of dictatorship, where no one in their right mind would want to live. Meanwhile, its southern neighbor with whom they are still at war, the Republic of Korea, looks like a technological paradise whose culture permeates every corner of the planet compared to its unattractive northern comrade. However, if you look closely, you'll see that South Korea is anything but a paradise. Over the past 70 years, 4 of the country's 13 presidents have been convicted for corruption, and 1 was even sentenced to death.
Bribery, abuse of power, coercion, and leaking government secrets.
17 years in prison for corruption, bribery, and embezzlement.
These political games are rooted in the fact that behind South Korea's glamorous success are just a few powerful families who today own half the country. In the 1950s, these were small family businesses that supplied noodles and repaired cars. But with government support, they raised the country from the ashes of World War II and became the largest corporations in the world, which you know very well: Samsung, Hyundai, LG, and others. For many of us, South Korean companies are associated only with home appliance and automobile manufacturers. But in South Korea itself, these corporations are involved in literally everything, from food production and highway construction to the creation of heavy weapons. Today, the heads of the largest conglomerates are implicated in corrupt deals worth hundreds of billions of dollars.
Local court has approved an arrest warrant for Samsung's heir apparent Lee Jae-yong in connection to the massive corruption scandal gripping Korea.
Presidents are replaced at their behest, and more than half of young Koreans between the ages of 20 and 40 believe they have no chance of building a successful career. How did South Korea become a glittering veneer of prosperity, concealing decades of economic missteps by its leaders? Let's find out. There is a small peninsula between China and Japan. Today, North and South Korea are located on it, but a little more than 100 years ago, there was a completely different state here. Chosun, or in translation, the country of morning freshness. Chosun, along with Japan and China, was far behind Europe, and all because the Eastern countries for a long time did not want to open up to the outside world. But if China and Japan, in the end, were forced to modernize themselves so as not to become the colonies of Europe, then the small Chosun itself was influenced by Japan. And while China is buried in civil wars, the Japanese authorities have acted with Chosun as recently as the United States did with Japan itself. In 1876, the Japanese arrived on the shores of Chosun and forced the country's authorities to sign a special treaty. This treaty granted the Japanese free access to 3 ports on the peninsula: Busan, Incheon, and Wonsan. Japan thus gained a new market for its goods and a springboard for building its power, right next to its main rival, China. Japanese textiles flooded the Yuseon market, and in exchange, cheap rice, the staple food for workers in Japanese factories, flowed from Chosun to Japan. And realizing that Chosun had become heavily dependent on its rival, China advised the peninsula's authorities to conclude treaties with more than just the Japanese. Thus, the United States, England, Italy, and Russia arrived in the land of the morning calm. All these countries saw Chosun as both a promising new market and a weak rival through which they could strengthen their position in the heart of Southeast Asia. Thanks to this attention, Chosun itself was transforming from a feudal village into a capitalist economy, where social stratification quickly set in. An influx of cheap textiles ruined local weavers, and food prices rose because landowners were now selling rice for export. While some residents built their homes from clay and vines, others could afford taxis and servants. Before, everyone had lived equally, if not affluently. But now the majority of Chosun's population was even poorer than before, and foreigners were in charge. This laid the foundation for the peasant revolution that broke out in Chosun in 1894. To suppress it, the authorities requested military assistance from China, Chosun's patron and older brother for centuries. At this point, Japan realized that this could lead to a loss of influence over Chosun. Under the pretext that China had illegally introduced its troops, Japan sent its own. Thus began the First Sino-Japanese War, won by a more modernized, equipped, and prepared Japan. Under the peace treaty, China ceded control of Taiwan to Japan and recognized Chosun as a completely independent country, but effectively renounced any patronage over it. The king of Chosun, given complete carte blanche, renamed Chosun Korean Empire in 1897 and appointed himself its first emperor. Clearly, this didn't effectively transform Korea into an empire, but adopting this title was intended to elevate Korea's international status as a now completely independent country. However, although Chosun ostensibly became an independent Korea, it effectively became a Japanese protectorate. Pro-Japanese local officials held key positions in the government, and most industrial assets remained in Japanese hands. A couple of years later, in 1905, Japan completely defeated two rivals' claims to Korea. The Russian Empire signed a peace treaty with Japan and recognized Korea as a Japanese zone of influence, while the United States ceded Korea after Japan reciprocated by ceding the Philippines. In short, at the beginning of the 20th century, Korea found itself under Japan's monopoly, which began implementing a strict assimilation policy. Koreans were forced to learn Japanese, convert to Japanese religion, and give their children Japanese names. However, this period in Korean history cannot be called an absolute evil. After all, it was a time of economic growth. Production in agriculture, fisheries, and industry increased almost tenfold. Seoul acquired electricity, trolley buses, running water, telephones, and telegraphs. Japan built large factories, schools, and railroads in Korea. While in 1900, everyone in Korea traveled on wooden carts by the start of World War II, more than 6,000 kilometers of railways had been built. Naturally, Japan did all this for its own benefit, so that Korea would become an excellent food supplier and a very convenient market. But it was during the Japanese colonization that the foundations on which South Korea's modern economy rests were laid. And you'll understand it all now. Meet this man, Lee Byung-chul. His name, I'm sure, means nothing to you, but you certainly know the name of his company. Perhaps you're listening or watching this story right now, holding his company's product in your hands. Lee Byung-chul is the founder of Samsung. Yes, the same Samsung that today produces flexible phones and designs the world's tallest skyscrapers, from the Burj Khalifa in the Emirates to the Lakta Center in Russia. But today, Samsung is the largest corporation in South Korea, but back then, it was a small office in the town of Daegu. In the 1930s, Samsung produced rice flour, dried fish, and noodles, exporting them all to China. Another Korean, Quinn Hui, was producing toothpaste in the 1940s. At the time, most Koreans brushed their teeth with plain salt, so toothpaste quickly became a hit. This tooth powder would later become the basis for the legendary Lucky toothpaste, which would become so popular that its name would be associated with every toothpaste in Korea. However, I'll tell you more about this toothpaste a little later, because you can't even imagine what Queen Ho's company would become. Finally, another enterprising Korean, Chung Ju-yeon, was involved in car repair, and for good reason. The main mode of transportation in Korea in the 1930s and 1940s were outdated Japanese and American cars that required frequent repairs and maintenance. So Chung Ju-yeon took out a loan and bought a workshop, from which his business gradually grew. However, at the height of World War II, the Japanese government took over the auto repair shop, merging it with a metallurgical plant. Incidentally, what was actually happening in Korea during World War II? It was essentially a Japanese colony where resources were taken from, while the Koreans themselves were forced to work in military factories and serve in the Japanese army. But as you know, Japan lost World War II, and after the capitulation of Asia's leading empire, the Korean peninsula was liberated from occupation. And now we can begin the next chapter in Korea, which the other two superpowers will tear apart.